and welcome back to our video series, My Sewing Lessons. In the lessons, you will learn more basic sewing steps as we introduce you to the world of making clothes. In this video, you'll make your first dress. You will find out what facings are and how to attach them to the neckline of your dress. And from this pattern, you can sew many other projects later. Depending on your fabric, you can wear the dress on many different occasions and style it to suit your fancy. We are using the Burda B35, which is the perfect sewing machine for your first projects. For the dress, we are using a muslin gauze fabric that softly drapes from sea poly. You will also need thread in a color that matches your fabric, interfacing, tailor's chalk, sewing machine needles, a set square, a tape measure, straight pins, fabric scissors, thread snips, paper scissors, a tracing wheel, tracing paper, a pencil, a seam gauge, and an iron. First, determine the Burda size that fits you. For the dress, you need your bust, waist, and hip measurements. You can review how to take your measurements in the magazine on page 12. You can also note your measurements on the size chart there. For the next step, we'll be using paper pattern pieces again. You'll find them on sheet 2. Each size has its own outline. Use a colored marker to highlight the line for your size to make it easier to see. Now cut out the pattern pieces using your paper scissors. Now you can prepare the fabric for cutting out. Place the fabric flat on the table with the right or nice side, which will later be on the outside of the dress, facing up. On the short side, measure a 50 cm or 19 3/4 inch section and use a straight pin to mark it. Fold the long edge of the fabric exactly at the needle and use your tape measure to ensure that the fold is the same width everywhere. Now fold the other long edge so that the selvages meet exactly. The fabric should now have 2 folds. The cutting layout in the instructions shows you how to arrange the paper pattern pieces on the fabric. Place the side of the pattern pieces labeled fold on the fold and use a few straight pins to fix it in place all around. Like with most patterns, you'll need to add the hem and seam allowances as Burda pattern pieces only have the finished measurements of the dress. Draw the allowances directly on the wrong side of the fabric. Place the set square on the edges and use chalk to draw a parallel line on the fabric 1.5 cm or 5/8 of an inch away from each paper pattern edge. Mark a cross on the wrong side of the fabric with tailor's chalk to help you find it later. Now you can cut out the pattern pieces along the chalk line using your fabric scissors. Later, you will stitch narrow strips of fabric called facings to the neckline for a neat and tidy finish to the edges. These facings, which are pattern pieces 3 and 4, are reinforced with iron-on interfacing to ensure that the neckline keeps its shape. One side of interfacing is smooth, while the other has small adhesive dots that dissolve when heat is applied and stick the fabric layers together. Fold the interfacing in half so that the adhesive dots are on the inside. Pin pattern pieces 3 and 4 to the fold of the interfacing. Then use a pencil and the set square to draw a seam allowance of 1.5 cm or 5/8 of an inch all around the iron-on interfacing. Now you can cut out the pieces. Before you iron on the interfacing, place a piece of fabric on your ironing board for protection. Now remove the paper pattern pieces from the interfacing and unfold the interfacing. Unfold the facings you cut from the fabric and place them together with the wrong side of the fabric facing up. Place the interfacing with the sticky side facing down on the fabric pieces, matching them perfectly. Now iron on the interfacing by lightly placing your iron on it without steam for approximately 10 seconds. Do not push the iron. Instead, simply press it on from above to avoid folds. Fold the facings along the fold again, right sides together, and pin on the paper pattern pieces. To help you to remember exactly where to stitch later, mark the seam line on the wrong side of the fabric. To do so, place a piece of soft fabric on the table and spread the tracing paper with the coated or colored side facing up on top of it. Place a pattern piece on it and roll the tracing wheel around the paper pattern, applying light pressure. This will press the color of the coating onto the fabric. Now mark the notches on the pattern so you know where to end the stitches later. Remove the paper pattern piece from the fabric and pin both layers of fabric together again. Flip the pattern piece and trace the first line to mark the other side as well. You will find detailed instructions in the tracing paper packaging. Mark all the other pattern pieces the same way. To prevent the edges of your fabric pieces from fraying, first use a zigzag stitch to neaten them. Prepare your sewing machine accordingly. To find out how to thread the machine and insert the needle, consult the instructions of your sewing machine. As we will attach the facings to the neckline later, you do not need to neaten these edges. Now stitch along the other edges with the zigzag stitch. Make sure that you always insert the needle right next to the edge. You can carefully trim the excess fabric on the edges, but be careful not to cut into the seam. Now it's time to start sewing. Let's begin with the shoulder seams. Place the edges together and make sure that the right side of the fabric, which will later be on the outside of the dress, is on the inside. Now use straight pins to pin the edges together. Always insert the pins through both layers of fabric and, for the best results, at a 90-degree angle to the selvage. Now you can simply stitch over them. Set a straight stitch on your machine. We'll begin with 3 to 4 back stitches to keep the seam from opening. Now stitch along the marked seam line. At the end, make 3 to 4 back stitches again. Stitch the other shoulder seam the same way. Now press the seam allowances apart. Unfold the front and back pieces and place the seams on your ironing board with the wrong side of the fabric facing up. Open the seam allowances and press along the seam. Now pin the front facing piece 3 to the back facing piece 4. The narrow edges match and the right side of the fabric is on the inside again. Stitch along the marked seam line and secure the seam beginning and end with back stitches. Press the seam allowances apart and neaten the outer facing edge using the zigzag stitch to prevent the edge from fraying later, as it will no longer be stitched. In the next step, we will stitch the facing to the neckline. To do so, flip the dress so that the right side is on the outside. Place the facing on the neckline so that its inner edges are exactly on the front and back piece. Begin at the shoulder seams and pin the edges together. Here, the seam should also match exactly where you sew. Stitch the facing along the marked seam line all around. At the end of the seam, make a few stitches on top of the seam beginning. To ensure that the facing lies flat at the neckline, clip the seam allowances. Snip the curves at a 90-degree angle to the edge several times until just before the seam, but do not cut into the seam. Flip the facing to the inside and use your fingers to push the seam completely out to keep the neckline smooth. Pin it using a few straight pins. Next, carefully press the neckline flat. To prevent the facing from slipping at the collar, you must stitch it all around. Set a stitch length of 3 mm or 1/8 of an inch. If your sewing machine does not have guidelines on the throat plate, you can place a piece of tape on the throat plate 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch away from the needle. Now stitch along the neckline edge from the outside. At the end of the seam, you will also make several stitches on top of the seam beginning. Now it's time for the side seams of your dress. Place the front and back pieces together with the right side of the fabric on the inside again. First, insert a pin through both layers of fabric at the notches. Next, pin the long straight edges together to the hem. The upper part will remain open for the armhole. Now stitch along the marked seam line and secure the seam ends with back stitches. Next, press the side seams apart. Fold the section you left open for the armhole 1.5 cm or 5/8 of an inch to the inside along the seam line and press it flat. For the armholes, turn the dress right side out. Use a few pins to fix in place the open edges you just pressed to the inside. To make it easier to stitch the armhole, first remove the extension table. Begin at the side seam with a few back stitches and then stitch 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch from the fold all around the armhole, catching the seam allowances. Now you are almost finished. The last step is the hem. Fold and press the allowances along the marked line 1.5 cm or 5/8 of an inch to the inside. From the right side, use a few straight pins to pin the hem in place. In general, the hem is always stitched from the outside, the right side. Measure a distance of 1.2 cm or 1/2 of an inch for the seam. Attach a piece of tape as a guideline again and stitch along the hem edge all around. Secure the seam ends by stitching on top of the stitches you made at the beginning. And now your new dress is finished. Very easy, right? And while making it, you learned how to sew a neckline with facings. We hope you had lots of fun making this and will return for the next lesson.